How's it going today, guys? In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the 4 nights and 5 days that I spent in Vieques. And it's an island off the east coast of Puerto Rico. I remember the night walking down a place called Roosevelt Roads to get to the terminal where I would ultimately catch the ferry. And the way I had it planned is I was getting the 3 a.m. ferry ride. So I expected to arrive on the island sometime around 4 in the morning. And I thought that I'd be able to sleep in the terminal since I had a ticket, but I think around 10 or 11 o'clock they closed everything down and I had to leave. And I ended up walking around in the area and I found this old abandoned bus stop bench that was overgrown, but it was a good place to chill out and hide till 3 in the morning until I went to catch my ferry. And the ferry ride was pretty cool. I won't lie, even though I couldn't really sightsee because it was dark out. But I wanted to get to the island as early as possible, so I had that full day ahead of me instead of trying to get there at 3 p.m. and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go to this island is because during my first trip to Puerto Rico, somebody showed me some pictures of a cemetery that was on this island, and it kind of became like a legendary cemetery in my mind, much like the big civil cemetery in Ponce. So I knew I had to go there and photograph that cemetery, and you can find it on my YouTube channel. I ended up going there, but I'll get into that a little later in this discussion. So I arrived on the island at about 4 a.m. and it was almost completely pitch black. I'm not sure if there were any street lights that were working. There might have been a couple that were on, but to my recollection, it seems like the island was pretty dark at that time. And there were a couple vendors that were there waiting for the people to get off the ferry. And so I paid $5 for a little cup of coffee, and it was so good. And I needed it after a long night of sleeping outside in the bushes and then riding that ferry. And I even got another $5 cup of coffee after that. And I just started walking around because I didn't have anywhere planned to go and stay. And it was kind of funny. When I got there, everybody else that was on the ferry, their cabs were waiting for them. And so one group of people would leave, and then another group of people would leave. And before you know it, I was the only person that got off the ferry that was still, just walking around. And I spent the next 4.5 hours just walking around the island, checking it out, looking at it. And I ran into a couple homeless people, but they weren't hostile towards me or anything. I was a little sketched out a couple times, I won't lie. It was kind of another culture shock, much like the first time I arrived in Puerto Rico. I had that culture shock, and this was pretty similar, but I got used to it right away. And one of the things that I liked about this island is horses would just kind of walk around on the streets along with dogs and chickens and cats and the typical stuff that you expect. But I've never seen horses just walking around like that before. I remember walking down one little business district and there were a couple horses ripping garbage out of a garbage can and making a mess and eating whatever they were foraging for in there. But it was pretty funny. And like I said, after about 4 or 5 hours of walking around, the sun started shining and it started getting hot. And I started getting kind of tired. And I found a breakfast place there. And I got some bacon, eggs, hash browns, and toast. And that was great too. It's exactly what I needed because my mission was to go to the municipality's office right away and try to request information to photographed some of the cemeteries that were there on the island. I was doing some research, and there were two main cemeteries that I was looking at, but there was also this Stonehenge place that I was reading about on the island that had some of the oldest skeletons in the world, I believe, like some of the oldest bones in the world that they found there. And it kind of remapped how they looked at the history of how people migrated through that area and stuff at the time. So those were my three main missions as far as this island. And I just wanted to walk up and down as many streets as I could and see as much as I could. So I wanted to start right away. So I finished my breakfast and I went to the municipality office and I got permission to film and photograph both the cemeteries that I wanted to film and photograph there on the island. And so I wasted no time marching to the cemetery that caught my eye for about the last year and a half, and I wanted to see it in person. It was something of a legendary cemetery for me, so I was really excited once I made it there. The thing that was unique about this cemetery is not only did it overlook the ocean, and I've been to a couple cemeteries before that overlook the ocean, but the thing that was different about this specific cemetery was it was overlooking the ocean going downhill. So when I arrived to the cemetery and walked through the entrance, that was the top of the hill. And the end of the cemetery was at the bottom of the hill. So being up there up top, walking into the cemetery, you could just see the ocean in a completely different way. It was such a great view, and I was so excited to start filming and photographing the place. And it was old and had a lot of history to it and a lot of amazing headstones. And I spent hours there walking around. And of course, horses bust into it all the time because they run wild on this island. And so that just added something different to it as well. This was the first cemetery I've ever been to in my life that just had horses walking around and hanging out in it. After I got done filming and photographing the cemetery, I realized that I needed to find an Airbnb because I wasn't trying to sleep outside on a bench at the park on this island. There was just a lot going on. There's a lot of people moving around. There is a decent number of homeless people that are walking around all night. So I just didn't want to risk it, and I didn't want to get into any kind of altercations or anything. So I started looking around for an Airbnb, but I came to the conclusion pretty fast that the Airbnbs were going to be way out of my price range. So I found a hostel for $44 a night, and it actually turned out to be great. Even if I had enough money to get an Airbnb, if I went to that island again, I'd probably just go to this hostel instead just because it was so cool. It was $44 a night, and I was literally the only one staying there for a couple days. So I got the room to myself, and of course it was a room in somebody's house. That was, how the hostel worked, and up to 4 people could have been in my room, but I was the only one that had a few days there booked, so I got the room to myself, and that was great. And the host was really cool. He always made some coffee in the morning, so I had a fresh cup of coffee. And I love how they do coffee in Puerto Rico. Most people in Puerto Rico don't use the coffee makers. They use the old school uh, coffee makers that you use burn up on the stove and cook coffee fresh that way instead of running it through the plastic tubes and all that like we do, and or at least we do up here in Washington. So I always had a great fresh cup of coffee every morning, and the shower was pretty cool too because he just kind of basically built it himself, and it was on the outside edge of the house, and it was really makeshift, but it had warm water, and you could tell he rigged all the pipes together and stuff, but it was awesome. I thought it was pretty cool. I saw some people complain about it later on when I was looking at some of the reviews, but I really enjoyed it. And he was a pretty cool guy. He knew a lot about the history of the island, so I had a couple conversations with him, and it was just nice to have that spot because the following day I planned on going to the Stonehenge, which is an ancient place on the island, and so I knew I wouldn't have to carry my full pack. I could just go light and bring some water, and I was going to make a day out of it because I almost had to walk to the other side of the island to get to it. Not that the island's big, so it wasn't hard or anything. So I got up, had breakfast, and I headed out to go to the Stonehenge that next morning. And it was a great walk walking through the island because I had to walk from the north coast to the south coast to get to it. And it still took a couple hours, even though the island isn't that big at all. So I was on my way there, and ironically enough, my host was driving down the road and he picked me up and asked me if that's where I was going. And I told him, yeah. So he drove me the rest of the way, and he showed it to me and showed me around and told me a lot of stuff about the history of it and the history of the island. And it was really interesting. This Stonehenge was something pretty special. These rocks were huge, like the size of boulders, and they were placed in these specific special ways. And it seems like it was done a long time ago. So there's definitely some ancient history in that area. So after doing a little more exploring at the Stonehenge, I decided to just take the rest of the day off and walk up and down the southern coast of the island. And it was great. There were lots of beaches. I was right there on the ocean the whole time. And I ended up just taking my socks and shoes off after a while and just walking in the water and the sand a little bit. And it was great. Then I laid a blanket down and took a nap for a couple hours. It's very rare that I'll take breaks on the beach when I'm on these walks, and I should do it more now that I'm thinking about it now. But I didn't do it enough. I was so focused on the cemeteries. They took up a lot of my time during these walks. So it was great just to have a day off and not really think about anything. And I ended up finding a restaurant that did a really good burger and fries. And if you guys have listened to any of my talks before, you know that my two main weaknesses are cheeseburger and fries and pizza when I'm on my long walks. I definitely like to indulge in both of them. But then I could tell that a big storm was coming in, so I walked back up to my hostel across the island again right before it got dark and a storm hit. So I was able to avoid it just in time. Something else that I failed to mention that was really awesome about spending time on this island was I made a stray dog friend, and the stray dog was hilarious. He would just follow me everywhere I went when I was walking inside of town. But once I made it to the outskirts of town, he wouldn't follow me anymore. But as long as I was in town, he would follow me everywhere I went, and he would jump out into the road and cause commotion on the streets with cars and stuff. But there wasn't really much I could do to control him. And he would even come into the grocery stores with me and stuff. And it really got on a lot of people's nerves because they thought the dog was actually mine. But no, the dog wasn't mine. I just made the mistake of giving him a piece of my pizza the second night that I was there on the island. And he would wait for me at the gate outside the hostel, and he would follow me around town everywhere I went. And I'll never forget that dog. It was pretty funny. I have a few videos of that dog, and I'll try to post it up on my YouTube channel on my shorts sometime within the next couple days, because it was pretty hilarious having that dog follow me around the island like that. So I went back to the hostel to stay my final night there, and the way I had it planned was I wasn't going to get back on the ferry and go back to Puerto Rico until late in the afternoon, because I wanted to have the whole morning to film and photograph the other cemetery that was there on that island. So I got up, and I didn't plan on making it to that cemetery till about 11, but when I got up at about 5 in the morning, something in me just said, you know what, get up and go do it now. Just pack your bags and go now and spend the rest of the day just hanging out and enjoying the island before you get on the ferry. And I'm glad that I ended up going with my intuition on that, because I got up early in the morning and I was able to get to the cemetery right as the sun was coming up. And the cemetery I'm talking about is actually the cemetery that you guys are watching right now. So I spent a couple hours here just walking along the beach as the sun was coming up and filming and photographing this amazing cemetery. And it was such a great sunrise and a great morning there. As you can see in this cemetery as well, it's right by the ocean but up on a hill. So you just get this amazing view of the water in the background. And just like the old cemetery, this cemetery was loaded with horses that were just walking around and almost acting as lawnmowers, really. And the cemetery was, this was an incredible one, you guys. And you can see a couple episodes I have on it in my YouTube channel, but I have the whole cemetery on display here as well. So I got done filming and photographing it, and right when I left, probably about 20 minutes later, a huge rainstorm started. And this was one of the biggest rainstorms I was ever caught in during my travels. And I ended up just, sitting under this tarp out on the road waiting for my ferry to come for the whole rest of the day, because you didn't even want to walk down the street. It was raining so bad. So that's when I realized I was glad that I got up in the morning and filmed and photographed this cemetery, or otherwise I wouldn't have been able to, because it was raining too much. And not that the rain really bothers me, I just don't want to mess my camera equipment up and stuff like that and get my bag soaked. And it always sucks when that happens. So I ended up just sitting under that tent for about 4 or 5 hours and waited for the ferry to arrive. And then I hopped on the ferry and started heading back to the island of Puerto Rico. And that's where this episode ends. In the next episode that I talk about my second trip in Puerto Rico, it'll be the finale where I talk about my final walk and all the interesting stuff I went through to get back to the airport in order to fly home. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.